Those lyrics at the beginning, first of all, that is
Yes.
you. Is that accurate?
That is me, yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
what language, what does it mean? Is it just sonic? Does it have meaning behind that?
That's actually Tabla language. So it's exactly what I play on the drum. Dati, da, ge, tina, gena. Dati, da, ge, tina, gena. And then ditte, da, ge, tina, gena is the next line. And you'll hear if I say that and then play it on the drum, it'll make most sense. So when you listen again, dati, da, ge, tina, gena, ditte, da, ge, tina, gena, and then you'll hear me play it on the tabla. So that's actually Tabla language.
You're listening to the Freio
Music Podcast.
To the Freio Music
Podcast.
My name is Ronan Skillen, and on Spotify or Apple Music or any other music streaming platform, you might know me as Didgi-Taal, which is a sort of a stage name pseudonym. And yeah, I'm a musician from Cape Town, South Africa.
Excellent. And are you based in Cape Town currently?
Yeah, I'm here right now.
All right.
This is my little home studio here.
And is that where you're from initially, where you were born?
No, I actually grew up in Europe. I was born in Ireland. I'm actually Irish, hence the name Ronan. And then early on in my life, I was only 2. I moved with my folks to Germany, and I spent a long time in Germany, 18 years. And then after various travels and lots of exploration, I should say, musically, and also just coming fresh out of school and needing to check out something new, I ended up in Cape Town, and I've never left. I just got kind of stuck here. Yeah.
What was it that initially brought you to Cape Town?
Initially, well, funnily enough, when I was 16, I had gone as an exchange student just for a 6-month period. So I knew the place already. I had always loved it, and especially the people and just the environment. I don't know if you've ever been here. It's just like living in a postcard. I mean, it's amazing. And yeah, so then it was kind of my last stop on this around the world ticket that I had. And things just aligned, and I met a whole bunch of people that I ended up forming a band with, and that's kind of where it started. And it was literally one of those things where the flight home left without me. I just didn't get on it. And then I stayed. Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah.
So let's rewind the tape a little bit. Tell me about how you first got into music. What was your first musical memory?
Probably sometime when I was like 3 or 2. But that I can remember, yeah. I mean, there was music in the house. My dad is a keen singer. He plays the flute. He's always been more the creative extrovert in the family, and I definitely got that from him. My mom encouraged it, but never really pursued any of her own kind of, shall we say, creative endeavor. You know, it was always just she appreciated it. And then when I was 8, I remember going to a gig, well, it was a concert more than a gig, I guess, of Benjamin Britten's, I can't remember which movement they played, but it was a classical gig, and I saw the French horn section, and I said to my dad, man, I want to play that thing, that round kind of golden thing. Yeah. And
Nice.
He took it seriously and bought me this instrument, and then I learned how to play the French horn, and I played it for almost 10 years. And that was really great. I mean, I kind of didn't dig my teachers, and it was a difficult love-hate, you know, where you have to do it and you have to do it a certain way, and it was always this battle. I guess it was just being a teenager and,
Yeah, thinking you
But
already know.
Yeah, exactly. But I got a lot from it, hey? I mean, I really benefited hugely in later life. I'm realizing more and more how much that influenced my sense of music and how I can hear harmony and know when things are in tune, and ensemble playing, when to shut up and when to play and all that. It's been very, very useful for that. So that's how I got into music, playing French horn, classically.
Nice. And what instruments do you currently play? You started there.
Yeah, at the moment, I play a various arrangement of didgeridoos, different styles of original eucalyptus didgeridoos, metal slide didgeridoos, sisal didgeridoos, which is a type of porous kind of agave wood. I've got plastic didges. So lots of different styles of reinventions of that Aboriginal instrument. And I play the tabla, which is a North Indian percussion instrument. And I play a whole host of other North African percussion as well, which a lot of I have just acquired over traveling. And, people sometimes come up to me after shows and say, man, you would really do well with this thing. And they'll hand me an instrument. And I'll find out later it's from Ethiopia or Ghana or somewhere. And yeah, I've been dabbling in a Ugandan harp instrument called the adungu, which is extremely beautiful as well. So yeah, that's currently what I'm most busy with, I would say.
When you're playing various didgeridoos, as somebody who does not know how to play a didgeridoo, it sounds very difficult. You got to get that circular breathing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, exactly.
And then what are the nuances, difference of playing various styles of didgeridoo? Do you have to change the way you approach it, or is it very similar?
The thing about it is, one of the things I love about the didgeridoo is that it's so personal in that you're literally dealing with a hollow log, it's a pipe, and there's no notation, there's no real kind of musical language for it. It's nothing that's ever really been written down, or so it's really up to you to decide what you want to play on it and what you can play or what you think you can play on it, which I love. And most didgeridoo players that I know have their own style, and they have a particular obsession with either something rhythmic, they play in a rhythmic style, or others use it purely in a meditative way. For healing purposes. It's a huge instrument in the kind of alternative, what should we say, sound healing world, So yeah, there's different approaches. I mean, I always approached it from a very, shall I say, musical point of view. I had whole arrangements like verse, chorus, bridge, end. It was like a piece of music that I would always have in my mind, and I could memorize them if I played it enough, and it would just be in the hard drive, sort of in my head, And funnily enough, the didge always was an instrument that I just instinctively knew how to play. I just did it. It was really interesting. It's never been a chore. It's never been anything where I feel like, oh man, this thing, it just always, makes me feel like I'm battling. It's always just flowed, which is lovely. And my style is very rhythmic. It's very more like, I was influenced heavily in the time where I was learning how to play by bands like The Prodigy and the Chemical Brothers, back in the 90s. All those breakbeat, big beat kind of things. And I used to jam to that and just develop a style with it. And then I guess, push the limits of how you can play certain notes very specifically until they break. So you know exactly where the breaking point is, and then you kind of find that line. And there's an amazing array of intricate technique that you can develop on that instrument. People don't know that, I think. A lot of people just sort of have this image of a didgeridoo being a kind of a hippie coughing around a fire and just going, it's it's kind of got that unfortunate stereotype attached to it as well, you know? Yeah.
Well, in any track that there's a didgeridoo, it's got like a sonic quality or like an undertone that separates it. I instantly notice didgeridoos when I hear it, and it's always an instrument that's called to me. I don't know how to play it. So tell me about some of those nuances. Like when you talked about that note breaking, you know, what's happening? You know, either like scientifically or intuitively. How do you
right
interpret what's going on?
So imagine if you're plugging a guitar pedal, like a flanger or a phaser or a chorus effect or whatever it is. You can kind of emulate those sorts of ideas by very subtly using your the angles of your tongue, your jaw, how much breath you give, how much pressure, how much you push. And I mean, the idea of that breaking point, what I'm talking about is like any instrument, if you play it too hard, it's just going to sound shit at some point, you know? So that sweet spot that you can find, and I mean, obviously in some registers, let's say you're at the top of your neck, if you're playing at a guitar, or the middle or the bottom, there'll always be a better way to play those areas, you know what I mean? To get the best sound out of it. And it's similar on the didgeridoo, where you have overtone scales or particular frequencies in your voice. If you're a guy like me, I've got a fairly low voice, so I can get quite interesting sounds out of my low tone. That kind of thing, you know, and just to test that area and then be able to access those points instantly whenever, so that you actually have this repertoire of almost like a whole range of different notes, shall we call them, in your mouth available. It sounds weird to try and talk about it, but yeah, I mean,
we're already translating music into English, which is not there's no direct translation.
Exactly. Right. For sure, I like that. But that's what I mean. Yeah, and I must have driven my parents and everyone who was around me completely mad at that point. Just over and over and over. The time it took. But it was a healthy obsession, you know, one of those great things you just do once in your life and you got it, you know.
And does each didgeridoo have a key, and is it like dependent on the length of the didgeridoo?
Yeah, the length and the width of the diameter of the actual body of it. The nice thing about, obviously, the reinvention of it in the slide department, meaning that you can tune it. So one of the slide digis I have has 2 octaves in it, which is just amazing. I mean, and that's really helped because it means that I can, you know, say, okay, what do you want? Let's play an F, let's play in C or in B, and then you just slide it and there it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. I don't think I've ever seen one of those.
Have you not? Okay,
no.
Interesting.
So it's kind of, I'm thinking of like a trombone or a trumpet where you could slide. Is it comparable?
It can be. Anyway, just imagine some people call it a didgeridoo, which is quite funny because it is like, you know, it's you have to lubricate it, and it's got these O-rings that just sort of like seal the airflow, and then it's very much. I mean, you can change the note within half a second. You know, it's
wow,
it's that fast.
Cool.
So you can play bass lines on it. It's an amazing thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool.
So after you started picking up all these instruments and started honing your skill set, when did you start deciding that this might be a path for your life? And when did you start making music more seriously?
Right. That started in Cape Town when I arrived here. I was 20, and I remember meeting a bunch of guys at a gathering, some party. And I was always just this dude who had a didgeridoo on him. And then, it sounds so cheesy, but it just sort of clicked, and we had this connection and this sort of, there was not much discussion, which is, again, that musical language just was there, and we just kind of did it. And I remember we had a few gigs, and I got a taste of what it feels like to respond to an audience and have them be part of an experience of what it was like for me. And weirdly enough, right off the bat, and this is also important, I guess, it was a completely different change from what it had been like playing the French horn, because that was all written mostly by someone who had been dead for 300 years, like a classical composer. And here I am with this pipe, and it's entirely up to me, and it was just about my own imagination and improvisation. So that world just exploded, and it was so amazing. So that I remember very clearly, like we had a little trio back in the day, and yeah, there was just enough of a bug that bit me then, and I was like, I'm going to try this and see what happens, and I'm still doing it,
That party, you're the guy with the Didge, and then you start probably jamming, and you make a connection, you start to vibe with people, you get your network. Right. When did you start recording music and like documenting what you're creating? Because there's something about playing in the moment, which is wonderful, but then once you start recording, that's an entirely new realm.
Yeah, that's a very revealing and often scary process, especially early on, where you hear yourself. I was from the mini disc era. I don't know if that's your generation, but I had mini discs, and they were great because they were small, and you had a digital recording, and you had a little player which was like a Walkman size, and just a little mic. You could take it anywhere. And I used to either record myself just for ideas and keep them, or any session we had that was just a sort of a jam, was often recorded and documented. And something I would say is the most valuable part of any musician's life is when you, as you said, get to listen back to what you sound like and realize that you either need to go home and practice a lot more, or you kind of have a synergy. And I mean, sometimes the synergy is enough to make it be magical. The playing doesn't necessarily have to be as amazing. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, that was when it began. I mean, and that was pretty early on as well. I was dabbling in that in my 20s already, yeah. Obviously, I mean, the evolvement of all of that and the way technology has kind of come and gone and is still evolving every day. I mean, it's hard to keep up, what is possible, really. But I've always, I think, from then on in and right until this day, even I've enjoyed that authenticity of capturing real people playing the instruments as honestly as you can capture it, and then enhancing it if needed, afterwards. Instead of the other way around, which is often the case these days. I mean, you've got AI these days creating music artificially. It's amazing,
Given that you started out on wind instruments that are purely analog, what was the shift that led to digital? Your name, the brand, what made you come up with that?
Didgi-Taal, right. That's interesting. I mean, Digi obviously is the didgeridoo part, as well as it's a play on words. Digital. I was only releasing the EP that I made initially. No, it was an album. It was an album, actually, in a digital format. There were never any CDs that were pressed. And the Taal part, Taal, is actually an Indian term which means the metric counting system in North Indian music. So there was a lot of play on words there that made sense as the brand Didgi-Taal, because I mixed the sort of ancient Aboriginal and ancient Eastern with my own hybridized African influence somehow. And it was, that was the sort of emergence of that name that came,
Well, I appreciate you kind of breaking it up and revealing how it was created, because I thought the spelling was interesting. I wasn't exactly sure where it was intended, but I didn't know about the Taal being the metric, unit for counting.
The Taal, I mean, you'll often hear it. I mean, Taal is, I mean, it's got various inflections and ways in which it's used in Indian music, but yeah, your Taal is your counting, you know, your way of communicating the rhythm. So it just, I mean, I guess, adapted a cross-pollination of the words as well as the music, which made sense. It was one of those days where you just wake up with the idea and there it is. It didn't take much thought, you know. It was cool. Yeah.
So it seems like Indian culture and music has shaped your trajectory and your music. I see the tablas, and you've mentioned some of those instruments that you play. How did you get introduced to Indian music, and what, you know, got you in that direction?
Right. I was a 12-year-old at the time where my dad had this vinyl collection of anything from Rai Cooder to Shakti. I mean, Shakti was a band, and still is a band actually, made up of John McLaughlin, the guitar player, L. Shankar, who was the violinist, a guy called Viku Vinayakram on a South Indian clay drum called the Gattam, and the great tabla maestro Zakir Hussain, who is probably the most famous tabla player in the world. And they had this quartet, which was totally groundbreaking. I mean, in 1971 or 2, I think they actually coined the term world music. I think they kind of invented the genre, which is quite something. And this particular record was called A Handful of Beauty, with a close-up of John McLaughlin's face on it. And I used to listen to that album every day for about 5 years. I mean, I don't know why. And I loved Indian food. I loved the philosophies. I didn't understand it, but I just was always drawn to it. And I mean, I had this connection to the East somehow, but particularly India, not just, I mean, the East is large. India in particular was... And the tabla in the music always fascinated me more than any of the other. I mean, John McLaughlin, funnily enough, he translated the Western sound for me in order to understand it more, maybe. But the actual sort of obsession was with this Indian drum, and I always spoke about it. I always used to listen out for it in music. I always knew that I wanted to get my hands on one sometime at some point in my life. And then I remember I was 22, I think, and my folks gave me a tabla set for my 22nd birthday, or a Christmas present, I can't remember. That was in Cape Town already. And then I sort of realized pretty quickly that you need a teacher with this. It's not something you can just learn on YouTube or teach yourself like some other drums. Also partly because it's not such a popular instrument like a djembe or a drum set. And it's just regarded as one of the most intricate fingerstyle instruments in the world, you know. I mean, so that's how it started. I was really lucky to have a teacher in Cape Town for about a year. He showed me the basics. And then even luckier when there was this guy who was touring with a violinist, a sitar player, and I can't remember if there was anyone else. Not that it matters, but they were on a tour of, I think it was southern sort of hemisphere, and they stopped in Cape Town. And this tabla player, Akram Khan, was on the stage, and I happened to hear about this gig and went, and I think I was in tears at the end. I couldn't believe what I had witnessed. I mean, it was one of those gigs where you have this revelation and you witness it the first time ever, and you actually understand, well, no, you don't understand. You can kind of see the glimpse of what is possible with this instrument, you know. And thankfully, I'm a pretty perseverant kind of guy, and I made sure I would meet him, you know. And I kind of, weirdly enough, at that stage, I was already playing some other percussion, and I mean, rhythm has always been an obsession, hence the Didgereedoo style as well. But I basically ended up being invited actually by one of the sound engineers who knew me, and he knew how much of an obsession I had with the tabla, to a session where they were actually recording something while they were in town, these guys. So I ended up in this studio environment with this great tabla master. And that was an interesting interaction. I ended up speaking with him, and I guess I convinced him that I was mad enough to give this a shot. And he actually then, luckily, I mean, he formally sort of invited me to come and study with him. And then I began that journey. I went to India, and I remember actually after that interaction, I went straight home, booked the flight, and called him in his hotel room, and I said, I'm on my way, you know. So that's how it started. It was an obvious route. It was something that I guess in that particular situation at that particular time was something I couldn't ignore. It was like, this doesn't just happen. You don't just meet a tabla master who invites you to study in India with him. It's just like, wow, okay. Yeah, so that's the beginning of that.
Oh, that's amazing. It seems like you put yourself out there to the world so that sound engineer even knew that you were interested in this. So by putting yourself out there, and then the universe kind of came to you in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you took action.
Exactly. I could have let it slide and go, oh man, you know, who do I think I am, or what, you know, but I young and foolish is maybe one way of looking at it, but also just optimistic and, you know, wide-eyed. I just couldn't ignore it. It was the greatest idea at that time, you know. After
you got to kind of get access to the inner knowledge of the instrument, and you got to travel to India and play and I'm sure meet other great musicians, how are you able to incorporate these various cultures? Because you're already, you know, you're bouncing around countries as an individual, but you're still pulling Aboriginal instruments from all over the place. It seems pretty cool. How do you know what is going to blend well and what should stay out of the mix?
Great question. I think the obvious answer would be the sonic capabilities, you know, how you are able to blend certain sounds. But I mean, a very important part of what I do is also to not do what is so often the case, which is this cultural appropriation issue, where you have a person who has really got very, very limited understanding of an instrument and uses it because of its exotic appeal. I mean, a djembe is a great example, the West African drum for me, for that. It's sort of the most well-known African drum. Everyone can make a sound on it, a noise, and you'll often find it in various situations where it's actually more annoying than it is fun. With someone who's playing it in a way that they think is cool, but it really isn't what it should be. Do you know what I mean? That's quite a harsh way of putting it, but I mean, I realized very early on, especially the first time when I went to India, that like, to do this thing justice and to respect this instrument, I need to know what I'm doing, because if I get on stage and there's one person in the audience who's going, that guy's busking, I mean, it's just bullshit what he's playing. His technique's all wrong. It's not the right thing. I'm going to feel like I've almost done his culture a disservice. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's a bit hardcore, that approach, but I kind of have always thought of it like that. And I know that in my music that I make, I'm walking a fine line already. I'm kind of borrowing and hinting at, and in a way showing people like, hey, here's a context in which you can listen to these sounds in more of a kind of a accessible way, maybe. You don't have to listen to purely Aboriginal didgeridoo or Indian classical music in order to be exposed to this. So that's another aspect. I mean, the blend of, as I said, the sonic nature of those instruments is really beautiful. I find it quite watery. It's very mid-frequency, but also very sharp and extremely sort of warm and deep. And it's an amazing kind of combination of tangible sound almost. It's got this like fluidity to it. Also the rhythms and The didgeridoo obviously is a fluid sound always, because it never stops. And I mean, on that note of appropriating it, I mean, I did go to Australia, and I've managed to find enough information with enough of the sort of north of Townsville. There's a Aboriginal tribe that I met, and I stayed with them and had fantastic interactions. We actually made didgeridoos together, and I'm not trying to justify anything or say that that is how you should do it. It's just something I think for myself I've always wanted to, try and be as authentic as possible. And I guess if you're authentic, it's going to sound good in a way. You know what I mean? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And it leads to a lot of other questions, though. So by staying and immersing yourself in these various cultures, making didgeridoos, going to India and studying the music, I feel like you're able to accelerate your learning. But not only that, you're able to get closer to the source of how it ought to be played or how it was intended, or the cultural significance of that instrument.
Right.
So given that you did clearly put in the work, I wondered, did you have any self-doubt when you are recording? Like, hey, I'm not Indian. Maybe I shouldn't be playing this, or I'm not Aboriginal, or, how do you work with that in your mind? Because clearly you put in the work, you have paid the instrument its respect, but how do you overcome any maybe lingering doubts or notions in your head that you need to do more?
Right. I mean, I think there's always some form of that, no matter what you're doing in a recording studio anyway. There's tomorrow it can always be better, or there's always someone out there who can do it better or sounds better or that you look up to, which is also motivational in a way. It's a good thing. I do go through phases where I specifically won't play a groove that I know will work because it's almost too traditional, in a sense that, like, I mean, we could go very, very deep into this now and there wouldn't be enough time. But for example, there are 6 different schools of tabla in India. I didn't know this until I went. And I obviously happened to be part of one of them. By default, it was just a thing that I ended up slipping into. And I only realized a little later on that that was a big deal. So, like, in Delhi, you play a certain style. In Calcutta, you play a certain style. In, Mumbai, there's a different style. And I can hear that now. I couldn't hear it then, though. So what I'm getting at now is, like, in your recording setup situation, is it appropriate for me to play a style that I haven't really been schooled in, but I know about? That's interesting. I mean, and sometimes with respect to the styles, and because I'm a drop in the ocean in terms of this instrument, and I'm fully aware of that. I can hold a groove, and I've got good timing and all that, and my technique is fine. There's nothing wrong, but it's not in any way really virtuosic the way someone else in India would play, for example. But in the context that makes the session work, I try to blend as much of the authentic, shall we say, style of what I learnt with the fusion of whatever the music is demanding. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I appreciate that well, first of all, I had no idea that there are 6 schools of tabla. So that was very insightful to me. And so what is your take, though? Did you decide not to play that other school of style that you know about?
Well, I don't know it enough. So yeah, I mean, I would
You hold back. Okay.
Yeah. I would hold back from that for sure. But, like, I mean, a lot of what I have ended up doing in a recording setup is very much, I would say 70% of the people listening to it are more Western ears anyway. So I'm making it listenable from that angle without trying to dilute it, Yeah.
Looking in hindsight, what was a major like fork in the road or inflection point on your journey where you had a choice or some sort of opportunity that we have yet to discuss presented itself that led you to be where you are today?
I guess in some way, feeling like you could be allowed the freedom to actually do what you're passionate about for a living.
Oh,
What
I'm sorry to
sparked
interrupt you,
that?
but yeah, what brought you to that
No.
realization?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm not sure, actually. I think it's more of a general feeling that I got over time. I'm more of the kind of guy who has these experiences that happen, and only a month later do I actually understand what it was about. You know, it's not like, now's that time, I got to do it like this or something. Except for maybe that time where I went to India. That was a very significant moment. But maybe not the moment that you're after in this question. I mean, that was certainly a reach. It was like, okay, I'm going to check this out. And I might completely, lose all confidence in what I have as what I think I am in terms of music. And thankfully, I battled through. I mean, that training it's rough, but I mean, I guess getting recognition and finding ways to actually play on stages that you want to play on and play with the musicians. Maybe there's okay. One thing that I always did was to try and play with people that were better than me, just in order to learn every time I went into a session with them, whether it was a rehearsal or a recording or a live gig, a stage, just to be in a situation where you're constantly learning and evolving. That was always important. And I remember thinking that would be something that could carry me over forever, because there's always going to be someone out there that'll inspire you and you want to play with, I guess. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Yes, it's good. I appreciate it. So
Cool.
Another question of a similar note, but a slightly different take on it. What, looking back, was a moment that could have been perceived as a failure, but ultimately set you up for success?
I always used to shy away from electronic music for a long, long time. I think it's a largely influenced part of my whole kind of persona that came from my dad, because he was such a purist in that, like, you don't do that and you shouldn't play like this. And he was my biggest fan and my biggest critic. It was that thing, where you... and I remember there was a moment where I surpassed him. I kind of said, hold on a minute. You're that generation that is now so outdated. And I need to just do this. And I mean, the Didgi-Taal remix was that, the X remix. X being the guy, this producer, this young guy from Johannesburg who I met, who just took my songs and just went, it was amazing. And I loved that, because it gave me this new idea of what electronic elements and genres can do with music. If you remain within your voice and your authenticity, it's endless in that world. And that was a very interesting moment where I was quite afraid of it, and I felt like, why would I do this? It's something that's going really against the grain for me. And then having done it, the revelation was just like, oh, cool, there's a whole new world now.
I appreciate you sharing that. So let's dive into some of these songs. One in particular that I'm really curious about is The Walker. And I see that there's multiple versions. So tell me, what is the video version versus the full version? Like, what? Start there.
The video version, the Walker, I mean, the name itself is fairly self-explanatory. I'm a guy who loves hiking in the mountains, especially in Cape Town. It's just like, I mean, it's like therapy as well as just getting exercise. It's one of those cities where you have complete solitude in pristine nature within 10 minutes of the city center. It's an amazing thing. And I came up with most of that tune on a walk. Like within a few minutes, it just happened. The riff, the whole kind of groove, the whole idea of it. And initially it was just an acoustic thing again. In fact, I began making a library music thing for some kind of series, I think, and it had that riff. And then my producer again, we had a discussion about it, and he took that song and we made it into what it is now. Excuse me. The video version of that is a slightly more condensed version of the exact same thing, but it has a music video that goes with it, which is a kind of a fun, almost 2D drawn animation thing. I don't know if you've seen it.
Did you come up with the album art?
That was from the video as well. That's actually the stick man, the Walker guy. That's actually a screenshot from one of the frames in the video. Yeah. Okay.
I wasn't sure if it started out as the image and then it became the video.
Yeah, no. It was, you know how it goes. I mean, certain things just happen in one take and they are all there. You know, the whole idea just executes, and some things take a while. And this was one of those that took a fair while to complete itself, shall I say. Yeah. But that image is just from the video.
If we were to now kind of talk about the full version, it starts out, I think it's a guitar riff, if I'm not mistaken.
It's that,
but there's...
It's the Ugandan harp, the Adungu harp, yeah.
But there's also some, I would say, electronic elements or, some, like things that don't quite sound, like you could make it sonically.
Right.
And is that Ix kind of coming into the mix?
That's him. What's amazing is all of those sounds are actually my percussion sounds that he's just taken and sampled and manipulated and chopped into ideas. And yeah, he's just a wizard with that. So that was his creation. Yeah.
Tell me about the creation process of that song, because it's really a beautiful track and it has such like character behind it that I'm curious about. Obviously, it came to you when you're on a walk. The Walker, is a very natural name for that.
Yeah.
And how do you bring it into the studio? So do you capture your ideas on the walk?
I do.
Or do you keep it in your mind?
I do.
How do you capture?
I just use my iPhone. I have this, like any phone has a recorder. And you just take ideas down, and a lot of it, if it's really strong, I'll come straight in, sit in the studio and just put it down, and then sometimes walk away from it and come back a few days later and see if it was actually any good, But the process for that song was largely, again, a remix. So the initial riff and the initial percussion stuff had already been done for the acoustic version. So the Didgereedoo part came later. I mean, I came up with that riff again, some other walk, and it just tied in together so beautifully. And I remember what I would do is record the riff, send it to Ix, and then he would go, "Oh man, that's great," or "Not so sure." And within a day or two, we would have it, and he would then mix it, send me stuff, I would remix some of it, and it was just a very natural process. The idea behind it was that it needs to flow and bounce and be a kind of a very happy but intense song, like where you get this euphoric movement of you're on a mission in that music, it moves all the time. That was the feeling behind it. And
it's definitely got that forward momentum feel, and it's energizing as well.
Yeah.
So That's beautiful. So I'm curious, when I was looking up your work on Spotify, I see that you're releasing some music under your own name and some music under Didgi-Taal.
Right.
So why the split, and what's the difference? Or what, when you come up with a track, which direction does it go?
Right. Didgi-Taal being really the kind of solo thing for me, especially Volume 1, that acoustic album. And then the X Remix and the Walker now are still under Didgi-Taal, but they're kind of collaborations. It's the beginning of like bringing another element in. I mean, in a funny way, that Ronan Skillen Didgi-Taal name thing initially was an error on their part, and I tried to contest it forever, and I just gave up. And it doesn't really matter, because there are so many other collaborations that I do that, in a way it sort of overlaps the Didgi-Taal and the Ronan Skillen thing, although I try to keep any other collaborations that don't involve Didgereedoo music just Ronan Skillen. That is kind of the idea behind it.
Now, what advice would you give to a young musician starting out today?
Oh man, don't be shy to ask questions, I think, is the thing. Because, yeah, there are dumb questions, but if you ask it at the right moment and it's a person that you really admire, if they are, if they have been there themselves, they'll understand why you asked them that question. I think that's a valuable thing. Explore anything and everything that you can sonically. Music is infinite, so you can't do it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means you don't want to do it.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think be critical of your sound and your technique and your work, and be open to the fact that you may be onto something that hasn't ever been done, and you may also be onto something that has already been done a million times, but check it out all the way until you know what it is that you're doing. And only then, I would say, try and develop it. And then you will start the process of developing your own sound and your own voice and your own identity with the music.
Another track, this one's released under your name, 8. Just 8.
Yeah.
It's a bold title.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what was the inspiration behind this one, and how did you come up with it?
Is that the one that goes dati dagatina gina diti dagatina gina tati dagatina gina? It does.
I'm not going to be able to say that to you, but
I'm pretty sure it does. It starts with yeah.
Yeah.
8.
Yep.
8 is my favorite number. I like the shape of it and the infinity of it and the whole kind of like, it just sort of keeps going. And that's always what that music in that particular song felt like. It was just like this, I could play that forever. I use a shaker in the song as well that has 2 seed pods attached to a string, which looks like an 8. And because it's, I think, in the order of the title sequence, it's actually track number 9. I kind of thought, let's just really fuck with people and put it at track 8 as, you know what I mean?
Those lyrics at the beginning, first of all, that is
Yes.
you. Is that accurate?
That is me, yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
what language, what does it mean? Is it just sonic? Does it have meaning behind that?
That's actually Tabla language. So it's exactly what I play on the drum. Dati, da, ge, tina, gena. Dati, da, ge, tina, gena, and then dite, da, ge, tina, gena is the next line. And you'll hear if I say that and then play it on the drum, it'll make most sense. So when you listen again, dati dagati nagina, diti dagati nagina, and then you'll hear me play it on the tabla. So that's actually tabla language.
And is that how you were taught? Were you taught in spoken form and then you had to translate it to play?
Exactly. I mean, nothing is written in Indian classical music at all, which is interesting as well, because it's the opposite to Western classical music in that it's an oral tradition. Everything is passed on through speaking, singing, clapping. So yeah, you would learn phrases and then play them. And only when you know the phrase by speaking would you be able to then play it. So you it's almost like a process you have to go through. It's almost like it's a very, very quick way to learn, I've discovered. If you're able to memorize something, you can do it more easily, you know?
And then once you start playing, you recognize, okay, that didn't quite add up to what I said. So there was a mistake there somewhere. So you have to say it first. You got to get that clarity in the spoken tabla language first.
Look, I mean, I'd say 90% of the time, yes. That phrase that I speak at that point is a kind of a part of a composition that would be known in the school of tabla that I was taught in. And if you said that to someone who plays tabla in that region, dati dagati nagina, diti dagati nagina, they would know exactly what it was and they would be able to play it themselves. Or they would say, oh, it's that composition. So in a way, those phrases can be very set. And because that happens to be in a 4/4 timing, and it just made sense at that time in that groove, I used it, you know?
Well, it's a beautiful track, and it's got such I don't know, for lack of a better term, like a cultural sound. It's got that Indian undertone coming through. And
it does.
It's a beautiful track. So I appreciate
man.
that. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk more about you and your story. So what are you up to moving forward? How has the past 2 years of chaos been? What has changed? What is life looking like moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting better here in South Africa. I'm hoping that we are through the worst. It seems to feel that way. The last 2 years were intense, extremely revealing and very challenging. But one of the greatest things about it for me was collaboration. And I love collaboration. I find that is one of the most rewarding parts of being a creative person. When you, I guess, have a conversation with someone in a musical way, you end up talking about different things that you never thought about, or realizing things you never knew. And I like that about collaboration. I mean, it was odd because I don't know how many people I collaborated with, but I never met them in person, which is bizarre, you know? I mean, I think a lot of people have been through that, where you're very isolated and you reaching out and you're finding a connection and it's authentic so that was very, very interesting. And I mean, I've always been someone who enjoys having bandmates, and either me being the band leader or being part of someone else's band, or having a way to interact musically, and it brings out so much more than what you could do alone, which is always great. So yeah, I mean, I there's a project that is fairly new, Mind Circle. We did 3 tracks during lockdown, and that was entirely internet-based relationship. All those files were done in isolation, and I mixed them, and yeah, an interesting process, But yeah, for the future, I think I'm playing live more, and I think I'll be in Europe later in the year, July, August, maybe in September even. And there's been a lot of people reaching out again, saying, "Hey, I think we can risk it now. Let's try, get back on the horse," kind of thing, and that's great.
When you are sitting down to make music, do you make music at a consistent time of day? X number of days a week? Like, what's your strategy for being consistent or steady with your process?
Oh man, I find mostly I'm more productive in the morning. Yeah, there's so much noise. Noise meaning people trying to get hold of you, or you have to be very disciplined in switching off your emails and your WhatsApp and your Zoom and all of that. And I struggle with that because I like to be in touch, but I also want to be in that zone and be able to go for a few hours, just be creative. So I'd say the morning generally is my best time. And then kind of after lunch is repeating what I already did before lunch. But that's also just developed in the last 2 years. It may well not be the case anymore, and it might be because of the lockdown thing.
And when you sit down and things are just not flowing without or with ease, so there's a lot of effort that you're putting in and you're just fighting this one riff or tabla line or whatever it is. What do you do in those moments where creativity is just not easy coming?
I tend to persevere because I know how the process of that particular beast works. It's like I think you'll find it in any medium that is an expression, should we say, whether it's writing or painting or dancing or whatever. Cooking. I love cooking. I find it one of my favorite sort of correlations between music. It's very similar for me.
I've thought that too, because there's got so many pots. They're all on different time signatures. Something's going to burn, and you got to toss this, move that. So I've always drawn that analogy in my head too. Yeah,
totally. And I mean, I love the idea that you can make up something from scratch. You look in the fridge. There's no food, but you make something great, and that's interesting. So, I mean, but to come back to your question, I mean, I would say the perseverance part of just cracking on with it. It might even take 3-4 days before you actually feel like, oh, okay, now I get it. It really was that hard, or I should have started it this way or that way. And then there's a little bit of a reward. It's frustrating, but I think it's something that I think the writing thing is probably the most commonly used analogy for that. Like, you just have a blank page and you start writing, and most of it's bullshit until a week in, you write a great thing, and it's like, hey, would you have written that had you just waited a week, or would you have written it only because you did all the other bullshit before? That's,
Yeah, and who knows?
Who knows? I mean, I find the divine intervention of it very interesting, and I mean, that's a weird way of thinking of it, but music in particular is so mysterious. It's one of those things you can only really feel or hear. It's not a tangible, inanimate object, or it arrives, and then it's the fact that we can understand it somehow and capture it, and that's bizarre. That whole concept to me is interesting. Which is, again, back to why I was saying try and be authentic. Because if you capture something that's going to haunt you forever and people feel like they know you, but in the wrong way, that's dangerous,
Looking back, what is one of the best investments that you've ever made? It could be time or money.
I would say the time that I've spent just honing my craft and putting in the hours and really giving it enough of a chance to really be what I think it can be. So yeah, invest time in yourself, I guess. I mean, whether that translates to money or not is a big question, because we all need food on the table and a roof over our heads. It's, as we know, the capitalist beast is there, and it works like that. So again, though, being someone who has realized the blessing of, being able to do what you're passionate about and making money with it is an immense privilege. So I suppose I don't take it for granted, that idea. And I do know that hard work goes into it. And some people say it's talent, but that's an interesting debate as well. I do think you get some freaks in the world that just do stuff and they are exactly what was needed at the time. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like Michael Jackson, or he's a freak for me. Like that guy was just a freak, you know.
He also put in the time, though, as far as I know.
Absolutely. I mean, and he was not a happy guy, really. I mean, I know that there was a lot of abuse that went on, but I mean, what he managed in the life that he had is immense, you know. So time, I would say, would be the most, rewarding.
And you mentioned earlier, too, just to circle back to it, but that you realized that in order to learn the tabla, as an example, you needed a guru or a teacher of some sort that really was at a different level than you. This is not something that you're just going to put in the time yourself in your basement and somehow become a master. You needed to learn from somebody.
Yeah.
So I think that's important too. Just realizing
very
certain things can be picked up and should be, and then other things you need to humble yourself to somebody else's knowledge.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that's always something to remember, that there's someone out there who has checked out what you're trying to do a lot more than you have, probably. And it's worth spending time there with them. Humble pie and just going for it. Absolutely.
For anybody listening, if they don't already know your works, where are some of the best places that they could reach out, contact you? If somebody's got a crazy instrument for you, where's the best place?
You can reach me on my webpage, ronanskillen.com. You can also just reach me via Instagram, Didgi-Taal, Didgi_Taal. I'm not really on Facebook much because I find it irritating. Email, Didgi-Taal@gmail.com. Spotify, Bandcamp. I'm all over there, all over those places.
And the last question's for you. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
Man, I was going to ask you, what instrument do you play? Are you a musician? Are you a producer? What do you do?
Yeah, so I do play guitar and then therefore bass as well.
Okay.
I like playing the drum kit. I don't have any tablas and I have no idea how to play it.
Right.
And interesting that you asked this, but I also play a little bit of djembe, and your story earlier about people playing djembe wrong really resonated with me. In college, quick little tangent story. In college, I decided to take an African drumming class.
Right.
Well, I was, we'll just say ignorant or maybe a little too arrogant to go to the level 1. Right. And so I signed up for level 2, and that was a big mistake. That was a big mistake. So it was wonderful. You know, we're all in this circle. Everybody's got a djembe. Yeah. We're all playing, and we had a guest teacher. Unfortunately, I don't recall his name, but he was like an African drum master. Okay. And, instantly he called me out. He's like, no, that was wrong. And then I was like, okay, let me try again. And then I could hear the difference. So I knew that there was a gap. I knew that there was space between what I was playing and what the desired output should be. Yeah. But I couldn't get my arms to hit it in the time signature so he walked around behind me, grabbed my forearms, and then played the drums with my arms.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly it was like, boom, the muscle memory just unlocked. And suddenly I could, play in threes and various time signatures that were really struggling. But nice. It was a story that you brought up, and I was like, man, that was me. So
right. Yeah, it's a revelation that, hey, when you realize how simple that mistake can be, where I know this. Just because you can make a noise doesn't mean you can play. That's great. Yeah. Wonderful, man. Okay, cool. Well,
I play a few instruments not well, right. But I really love mixing and sound engineering and working on Logic, and so that's kind of my style, more on the digital front. But I just love sound engineering and and music in general. So that's why I'm honored to talk with people like you who are really masters at their craft, and I get to learn, all kinds of stuff that I never expected, like the various schools of tabla, and it's so fascinating to me. So I appreciate you sharing all that.
Oh man, it's such a pleasure. I mean, I'm very happy to be here with you. It's great for me. I mean, I sometimes don't remember until prompted, like what I've been up to. It's an interesting thing to sort of try and talk about yourself. Fascinating sort of idea at all, to just go like, this is who I am.
Yeah. Well, I feel like as a listener, to get to know the musicians and the people behind the sound, kind of makes it more personable and approachable. So if another musician is trying to make something similar and it just seems impossible, and then you hear the person speak and you're like, oh wow, they're just a person like I am, and
exactly.
They went through those same struggles. So I feel like it's revealing to get to know the people behind the music. So I appreciate you sharing today and being open and telling your story and expressing yourself through the music, and then also on the podcast here. So
wonderful, man.
Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate your music and you sharing here today.
Real pleasure, man. It's great to have been here.
Back at you.
Listening to the Freio Music Podcast with Michael Morahan. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. And don't forget to share this podcast everywhere. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay tuned.
Freio Music, Freio Music, Freio Music, Freio Music. You are listening to Freio Music.